Okay, it says we're live.
Sweet.
Cool. All right. Well, hey everybody, people who are joining. I'm Annie, and well, I guess I'm probably on this side, right? And this is John. John this week is, I guess I'll let him give you the bio, but generally, where we are in this coffee chat series is that I'm talking to senior data analysts. And I'm finding that I'm really excited about this because a lot of you listening are interested in like learning about data analytics, but I get to learn from these senior data analysts as well. So thanks for coming on. John, this is your first time talking to like anybody live, right?
It is, yeah. First time live on any platform. So be interesting.
Cool. If you guys are out there, feel free to drop a comment in the chat to say hello. Um, John, I just will note there's like your setting is defaulted to private chat. So if you want to see the chat, you have to switch out of private chat. So anyways, if you have questions for us, drop a hello, drop a question. I'd love to see you guys. So John, I could have done research on you ahead of time, but I didn't do a ton. I'm curious, were you like always a data person? Were you always like, okay, I'm going to go into data or something math or something tech or whatever? Or were you a career changer like me?
I wasn't a career changer in the sense that I started with another career. I was one of those college kids, though, that switched majors like 4 or 5 times. So I
Mm.
always thought I was going to be like a mechanical engineer, building some stuff. But then I didn't like school, and mechanical engineering was like a ton of school. And so I kind of flip-flop between math and business because I was always good with numbers, always enjoyed that. And then honestly, I landed on statistics because it was the shortest major in college. So I went with that so I could get done as quickly as possible. And that's kind of what led me to the path of data analyst, because before that, I didn't really know what it was and like how to get into it.
Yeah, it's funny. I have never, like, math has like never been my thing. I know I made a post today about how I use the modulus operator, but math has like never been my thing. And if you had asked me, like, when I was in college, like, do you think you could be a data analyst someday? I'd be like, one, I don't know what that is, and two, almost positively no. So it's funny because like you saying you're interested in math and business, like naturally, if someone told me that, I'd be like, oh, you should look into data analytics. So
Yeah, it ended up being a good path. I felt kind of odd in college though, because I didn't have that clear path of what I wanted to do, right? I
mhm,
I sometimes am at fault of having too many interests and not specializing in anything. So I was like, "Oh yeah, I'd love to be a product manager or a project manager, or like marketing is fun, you know?" So it's kind of
yeah.
hard to narrow in a path. So that was definitely the hardest part of like starting my career journey.
Yeah. So like what got you actually like what was like was there like a defining moment or a defining thing that like kind of pushed you in? Was there like a job you just happened to get that got you into data analytics?
So I was working part-time for a startup as like an intern. It was more just a part-time job. It was at a like a tax, they're building tax software for
Mm.
accountants. And I was basically building out these tax forms on the back end using kind of like Excel logic. So like if this field is populated, then calculate this tax bracket, yada yada. Wasn't like the most exciting stuff, but I had worked in at like preparing taxes before that, so I had a little bit of background with that, and that's kind of what I thought I was going to go into, was being like a tax preparer or something like that. But really didn't enjoy it and started learning more in statistics, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. How can I use this like in my job? So I asked my then manager, was like, hey, I'm studying statistics. Like, is there any project I could do to like look at the data that we're using? He was like, oh, here's this data analyst at the company. Go shadow him. And I was like, oh,
Mm.
okay, sweet. So that was kind of like the defining moment of like, here's my opportunity. Let's not mess it up. And I shadowed this guy, and he was building basically the data infrastructure for this startup from the scratch, and I was helping him build some dashboards. And this one specific project I was actually working on for my team, which was like 3 or 4 people building these forms, it wasn't like the main tax forms, like for like filing taxes. It was for tax resolution. So people that get audited have to file like certain forms.
So
So they're
annoying.
not as common. But there's a list of like hundreds and hundreds of tax forms, and each state has a different one. And so one of the first data analyses that I did was saying like, hey, do we actually need to build all of these, or like, do we need to build the top 20 because those are the only ones that get used? And so I almost put myself and my other intern friends out of a job because I realized I like found through the data that we don't need to spend our time building this. And I brought
Oh.
that to my manager. It was like, oh wow, we've just been wasting 3 months of our time. That's great. But that was definitely like a defining moment of my career of like, wow, like if you're not looking at the data, you could be wasting your time or wasting company money, right? So it's really cool. And then through that, I kept shadowing this guy and working with him, and eventually just got the role as I graduated and was hired full time to work under this guy. And so he became my new manager and worked out great.
Wow. So if you wanted to do that so you could use more statistics, have you actually been using lots of statistics in your data analyst roles?
Not really. I've kind of
Okay.
went down the path of avoiding like strong statistical analysis type roles.
Hmm.
Because again, I like the business side more. I like being close to the business,
Yeah.
getting, 80 to 90% accuracy and going with a decision rather than running a full model to see if it's like statistically significant, right? Like I don't care that much, right? Like just
Yeah.
give me enough data to make a good decision.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So how long did you stay in, I guess was that, I don't know, actually know what Bill does. You're at Bill, right? So is that, are you at the same company? Was that a different company?
No, so this first company is called Canopy Tax.
Okay.
I was there for like a year as an intern and then probably another 9 or 10 months full time. But my manager at that time, he left to go back to another company. And then he recruited me to come with him basically a few months later. So I
Hmm.
went to a different company called Instructure, worked there for 9 months, and then I was laid off in 2020. And that's kind of what set me down the career path, career journey, job searching type realm. I really got ingrained in it and worked really hard. I basically said, okay, I have 2 months of severance. My full-time job is finding a job. How do I do that to the
Yeah.
best of my abilities? Um, and then I found a job within like a month, and I felt really confident in my interviewing skills, networking skills, and it was kind of like a light bulb of like, oh yeah, this is how it should work. Um,
Hmm.
and then I was at Progressive Leasing for a year and a half, and then now I've been at Bill for over a year now. So
That's interesting.
a bit of job hopping, partly due to salary. It's a little bit easier to jump from company to company and increase your salary. And then obviously the layoff. That wasn't my choice.
Yeah. That's interesting. So like if so the layoff kind of then prompted you to really look into job searching. Do you think that having gone through that made you more comfortable and confident, like so that the next time you realize maybe it's time for a change, you felt like, but I can do it?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, my previous company, I was always doing like the research and doing things ahead of time, just in preparation of a layoff again, basically. And then
Hmm.
also just in preparation of like getting paid what I'm worth. Because that's always been important to me. It's like it's funny. I used to think out of college I was going to be the most loyal person to a company, right? And I'd stay there forever, work my way up, do all that.
Yeah.
And I would see other people start leaving the company. I was like, why would you leave? This is so great. This is so great. And then that startup that I was at went through 3 rounds of layoffs, and I was never included, which was really lucky. But I realized at that point, it's like you have to take control of your own career because you might get laid off, you might get overlooked for promotion. So you just have to own your career. And yeah, being laid off and then going through that experience was just like, yeah, I got to own my career. I got to take control, do the research to know what you're worth, network so you're prepared. You don't ever want to, be behind in that process.
So what kind of things so now, what kind of things do you do to prepare to kind of, if you were to ever get laid off again, like you said, you do things now ahead of time to prepare. What are those things?
Yeah. So honestly, posting on LinkedIn, we talked about it a little bit before the live, is just creating that personal brand, right? Like you get more opportunities, more reach, more friends. You learn from other people. The data community is awesome in that way, that people are so willing to help, that I feel like if I got laid off, I could ask 20 people and they would have, maybe one job lead for me each. Um, so things like that, just building those relationships and being open. Um, and then the more you post on LinkedIn, the more chances you get the recruiter to see you and they reach out for you, right? Even if you're not looking in the moment.
Hmm. Is there stuff that you do within your roles? Like something that I started doing is like keeping track at the end of every week, my challenges and how I overcame them, and my wins and like what I learned, how many customers I worked with, which is kind of specific to consulting. But is there kind of like internal things within your job that you're doing?
Yeah, so I started that in this role because I realized, if I want to get like a raise or promotion, I need to tell them what I've done and how much value I've added. So the start of my position, I've been tracking like basically every major project I've done, just in an Excel sheet or Google sheet, and I have like what the project was, who it was for, what skills I used, and then like an estimated value of what it
Hmm.
provided. And that's been really great because I can go to that and reference it for a resume or an interview or a talk with my manager to like ask for a raise and things like that. So yeah, definitely I would recommend that and wish I'd done that in my previous roles too.
Yeah, I find that like this idea of getting metrics into your resume is so like vague. Like it feels like people are just making things up. Like how do you know like increased efficiency by 50% of X thing? Like how do you know that? Like how do you how do you know what metrics, like how you said the estimated value is that's closer, but it
Yeah.
still feels very vague to me to get statistics and values into a data analyst resume.
Yeah, it's funny. Honestly, I think that is one of my superpowers, is figuring out like metrics for resume. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's funny to say, but I just feel like that's where my mind goes. It's like if it's on my resume, it had to have had a quantifiable impact. Otherwise, like I'm not going to put it on there. So, for example, I created a Python script that automated some emails being sent out. So instead of
Mm-hmm.
my team spending 10 hours a week on that, I spent 20 minutes. So I calculated, okay, what's the average salary or hourly pay of someone on my team? Just estimated that. I was like, okay, $50 an hour, right? Times that by 10, that's $500 a week, right? Times that by 12 months, whatever, you get to some number and you have a quantifiable stat. That might not be the exact number that was actually saved, but it's an estimate, right? So things like that, where it's just like you kind of just got to think outside the box and say, like, did this save time? Which time equals money? Did it improve, like you said, efficiency? Efficiency also equals money, right? Like everything has a dollar to it. So you just got to be creative in how you calculate it.
Yeah. So, as you have gone through a couple of job searches, I imagine you've talked to recruiters, hiring managers, and stuff. Are you finding that there's kind of and I mean, I guess this is also probably I'll ask this question first. Have you managed analysts?
I've not. I've only really like mentored and helped more junior level um,
Okay.
analysts.
So,
It's never.
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you're good.
Just curious, is there like something that you find that they're really looking for? Like, okay, I guess the reason I'm asking this is when I was first getting into data analytics, I assumed that every time I was going for a data analytics role, they're looking for my super SQL skills or whatever it is. And then I'm learning that's not actually really the case. So, what are you finding? I guess what you're bringing to the table, and you feel like, what are they looking for from entry level all the way up? What are people really looking for from data analysts?
From entry level all the way up. That's a good one. So I kind of go back to the hard skills of a data analyst, like SQL, Excel. those are all tools to get a job done. But if you don't know the reason why you're using that tool or the reason to get the job done, it won't matter. So I think like the main skill is understanding business context and being able to work with stakeholders to solve a problem. So being able to articulate a story in an interview of, what was the problem, what you did to resolve that problem and what was the result, kind of that PAR or STAR methodology is super important for people to be able to articulate that, one, and two, be able to, show that value. Um, so yeah, it's kind of cliche, but soft skills really are what get you the job, because you can be taught a lot of the hard skills that a data analyst needs. Obviously, like I said, I've kind of avoided the more statistically heavy type roles that,
Yeah.
you do need a little bit of schooling and actual knowledge to do some of those things. But if you're closer to the business, doing entry level data analytics, working in Excel, like really you need to focus on the problem before you focus on the tool.
Yeah. Something that I've been tossing around recently, this kind of takes both of those topics and puts them together. And I don't know if I know how to articulate this well, but um, I think your personal brand on LinkedIn and then the soft skills that they're looking for. Um, I see, I think when people start creating content, like they're first trying to get their first data job, or they're further along the chain and they first start creating data content, the most natural thing that you're going to think of to show off is, hey, these SQL skills, let me tell you about joins or whatever, which is good. Like it's good to talk about learning those things, and to share helpful resources. But I think what what I'm seeing lately is the posts that really catch my attention are when people are able to somehow like show off their soft skills or like show that extra value, from the things that they're posting. What do you think about that? Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah. LinkedIn is a hard one because there's so many directions you can go with it, right? Like I started
Hmm.
posting more like SQL tests and quizzes and challenges because, it's interesting to see how other people code. Because I code one
Hmm.
way, right? I love CTEs. Other people love sub queries. Some people are very data engineer heavy and they think about the processing speed. Whereas I don't think about that because I don't really care. Like in my current role, it doesn't matter as much.
Yeah.
Um, so I think there's a lot to be learned through just the comments, and asking questions, even if you're posting something that doesn't showcase soft skills. The way you follow up in your comments to, pick someone else's brain, that can show some of those soft skills.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, posting about soft skills on LinkedIn is a little harder for me because it
Yeah.
definitely gets wordy, right? Like it's this text blob usually of this giant story. Um,
Hmm.
and it's hard for me to read those giant text blobs, to be honest. So I try not to do it very often.
Yeah, it's to that point actually, someone just asked this comment. Do you think it's a good idea to do an audio recording to communicate findings for a portfolio project? I guess you can answer that. I have a thought on it, but what's your answer for that?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think like a video walkthrough or yeah, an audio recording of a project is a great way to showcase those skills, and it showcases how articulate you are as well, right? And if you're able to go from point A to point B in a concise manner. Um, so I think that's great. I do that sometimes when I'm building dashboards internally, right? Like sometimes I put together something that's a little complicated and I've gotten feedback that I build dashboards for an analyst. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. I need to build it for business stakeholders.
Mhm.
So I'll put together a video recording and say like, hey, this is how I use it. Click this box to do this. Here's this filter here. Um, here's why this field looks like this, things like that. So that way they always have a reference that they can go back to and don't have to ping me 5 times, or if I'm out of town, they can't figure out the answer. So I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, like a visual way of documentation. I mean, I think that it's really excellent, like as a job seeker to do that. So you, especially just like you get the practice. I found in all my entry-level interviews, I was not sure if anyone had actually looked at my portfolio. Like, I think they knew that I had one and they were glad that I had one. But then it really came for me personally, it just came to like a conversation. Like they're like, "Hey, do you know how to use SQL?" And I was like, "Yeah, let me tell you about these three projects in my portfolio. How about Tableau? Okay, let me tell you about these three projects in my portfolio." And then we talked about them. And then when I was talking to hiring managers, I would bring up, oh, well, I use CTEs and this one was my first time using CTEs and I use them, and we got to talk about like what was challenging and what I enjoyed about the CTEs. And I I think that maybe some people looked at my portfolio, but I think that most of them didn't. So I think that it's possible that if you make a video, your peers on LinkedIn will look at it. Hiring managers may or may not look at it, but that means you already have the content. And I talked about this, I think, with Lauren on my coffee chat with her, but you like have the content in your head so you don't have to create it the first time. You just try to create the content for the first time and then also nail it in an interview is like really hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been lucky. I haven't had the need to build a portfolio, right? So I can't necessarily speak to that as someone that's trying to transition into data because I have the experience, right? I've done things at companies that have provided value. So I just talk to those in interviews. Um, but it's kind of the same thing what you're saying, right? Like you just got to know your stuff. You got to be able to talk about it. You got to be able to bring up examples. And I remember being in interviews for internships when I was looking for data analytics internships and full-time jobs right out of college. Like I remember being asked questions of like, what's the difference between a BI analyst and a data analyst? I was like, I have no idea. And I would just make up some BS answer, right? Like that clearly the interviewer saw as like, hey, he doesn't know the difference. And instead of saying like, I don't know, I made up an answer, right? I try to figure it out. So I think that's another key too, is like, if you don't know, just say you don't know, but say you'll figure out how to learn it by doing X, Y, and Z, right? So it's a little bit of, being honest and open about what skills and experience you do have, and then also exaggerating a little bit on those skills that you are picking up and be able to say like, yeah, I have done this project using CTEs, even though it's been done 500 times online, I still did it, right? Like I figured out how to do it. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that too, like, I don't I don't think that like any hiring manager is like looking at your project and like cross-referencing to see if somebody else has done it. So like if you truly just copied somebody else, that's a different story. But I tell people like there's no need to reinvent the wheel, like at least especially for entry-level jobs, like they're just looking to see if you could use the tool or not. And so if you figured out how to write that CTE from your brain, that's really what matters, you know?
yeah. Yeah, I try and put my like self in a hiring manager's shoe of like if I am a hiring manager looking at a bunch of portfolios and every single one has a superstore data set and project, and that's their top one that they put on, it's like I might not look at those projects because it is so repetitive, right? And it is an easy data set. And there's a reason for that. It's to introduce you to data analytics, figure out Tableau, be able to do things like that. But I think there is value in having unique projects and portfolios and experience that you can talk to outside of the commonalities.
Yeah, that's an interesting, like with the Superstore specifically, because that is the, for anyone who doesn't know, Superstore is like the data set that like especially every Tableau project is done on. I saw this interesting comment and I'm curious about your thoughts on it. Somebody said, would industry knowledge and simple insights with SQL and Tableau be more valuable than a rich understanding of all the tools in the beginning, at least? What's your thought about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's basically my background right there. That's my skill set, SQL and Tableau, and I've leveraged that to, become a senior analyst. Like I've used Python once or twice. It's not like a strong skill, I would say. I've used Power BI a little bit, but like those are my bread and butter, SQL and Tableau, and then yeah, business knowledge. So I think you can go a really, really long way just with that. I've also known managers of analytics that they're terrible at the hard skills, right? Like they're terrible coders, but they're really good at managing people and managing stakeholders and, project managing. So yeah, that business knowledge is huge.
Yeah, I actually think who was it? Matt Mike was saying how he had gotten his first data analyst job like within like a couple of months. Like he like this decided to make the jump and then like made it happen like in a very short span of time. And it was because of the job he was doing before. I think had something to do with like financial collections or something like that. And then the analyst role that he had applied for was doing that. So he had relevant industry knowledge and then like really he said his words like a basic grasp on like the SQL and the Excel and stuff. Um, and he got hired.
Yeah.
So what of that
Yeah.
kind of goes to that
I
point.
mean, my part-time job in college, like it was for a tax company, but they were hiring mostly like people that were in accounting degrees, right? Like going to be CPAs. And I was not that. So I was kind of like this anomaly, but I had prepared taxes as a like basically a part-time job in the tax season. And so that's what got me this like internship that led to my full-time job. And that was just because I had experience preparing taxes. So yeah, I think that industry knowledge and expertise can be something that you can leverage more than anything else. So yeah, I definitely recommend that for
Yeah.
people transitioning.
This one here, I think we talked about this on the stream. I'm not sure if we talked about it before the stream or when we started it, but just statistical knowledge, very crucial. I personally have been in my role for, I don't know, 7 months or something. Most statistics I've done has been mean, median, average, not even mode. So average, mean, median. And I sometimes have to understand normal distribution, like what that looks like, but not be able to do anything more than like understand what that looks like. How about you as a senior data analyst?
Yeah, I think it really just depends on the role. It's hard to say.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's very important to understand the basics of statistics, I think, right? Like what the difference between an average and a median is and how to tell
Yeah.
what that difference
Hmm.
is. That's very important. So I think the basics you do need to know. But the advanced stuff like ANOVA or t-tests or things like that, you're not, unless your job specific is running experiments, you're not going to use that very often. Um,
Yeah.
Most of the things you do are, I don't know if people want to hear this, are reporting based, right? It's building
Yeah.
visuals or reports. It's
Hmm.
not always analyzing data to figure out like what was right or what was wrong or what your null hypothesis was versus the actual
Oh,
results.
definitely. Yeah, because that goes to the business. This next question was about business stuff. This says, outside of experience, how do you think you improve your understanding of business and business acumen? I'm curious to hear your answer on this, actually.
Yeah, it's a great question. Something that's helped me honestly the past 6 months is trying to monetize through LinkedIn. I've learned a ton about like funnel marketing, right? Like how to get leads, how to get people interested in my stuff. Um,
Hmm.
Creating content on LinkedIn, like what is motivating to people, what catches their attention, what grabs them. So basically just doing stuff on my own, experimenting, trying it out. Um, and then outside of that, like LinkedIn is just so full of people that are niched down that if you want to learn about something, you can find it anywhere. And I mean,
Hmm.
Twitter for that matter, TikTok, like it doesn't have to be
TikTok,
LinkedIn,
yeah.
yeah, YouTube, like everywhere. So, like, if there's a specific industry that you're interested in, just go start reading, start listening, and then start trying to apply it. Do stuff on your own. Like, grab a data set from Kaggle, grab a data set from, your own apps that you use, and figure it out.
Hmm. Yeah, just start consuming that content. I have been working on, I was not a businessy person at all. Like I was a nanny and, I was doing the occupational therapy thing. So getting into a role now where I'm definitely not just a technical data analyst. I do a lot of business stuff because I'm a consultant. So I tell companies about how they're doing and help them make decisions. And it's been like really it's been like a birth by fire type of thing in terms of like learning how to understand I think this is the reason that a lot of my advice has pivoted from I used to talk more about technical stuff, and now I talk a lot about communication and critical thinking and helping like understanding the business problem, because I get a new company's problems every 2 weeks. And so like every 2 weeks or so, I'm coming into a new company and saying, okay, what's the business problem that you're having right now? What are we trying to solve? And I'm realizing that all every time you get a data analytics project, it really comes back down to, the money, the problem that you're trying to solve, efficiency, whatever it may be. But I think that a lot of people who are in analyst roles that aren't consultants maybe miss that because it just feels like a project after a project after a project. Um, but someone said to me the other day something interesting. He's like, yeah, I met with a CEO one time and he had like a different air about him than all the other people about the project. But he said, look, every time I swipe that key card in the morning, it costs me $88,000 or whatever it is. So at the end of the day, they have to be looking at the bottom line. So being in this situation is really like giving me that insight. And I try and give that back to people who are trying to get into the field, because I think a lot of people who have backgrounds like mine think, oh, I have to learn the SQL, I have to learn the Excel. And it's hard to get your head around why like actually being able to solve the business problems is really what they're looking for, even all the way down to the entry level roles. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Um, yeah, I agree with everything you said. The business problem is at the core, right? If it's like a spoke and wheel type thing, it's like there's the business problem and the money that a business either needs to save or make, and then there's these spokes. And one might be Excel, one might be SQL, one might be data science for AI, one might be, I don't know. There's a ton of different stuff, right? But that's always at the core is how do you improve the top line, right? Like how are you making money or saving money for the company? So if you can dig down
Yeah.
to that, and that's something I always recommend people ask in like interviews is, hey, what's the biggest struggle for the company right now? What problems are you
Mm.
trying to solve? Because then you
Mm-hmm.
have this idea going into a new job of like, hey, what are they trying to do? Like, what are the questions they're asking? And maybe I can come in with a new perspective and try and solve those ideas. Because if you just come in saying like, hey, I know SQL, yeah, I'll write a bunch of SQL. And then you just wait for people to tell you why you're writing a SQL, like you're never going to get to a level where I don't know, you'll have job protection. There's no such thing really, but you know what I mean? Like you're seen as more valuable than someone that has to be told, hey, go write this SQL because of this, right? If you're
Mm-hmm.
able to proactively seek out those questions and those concerns and find a solution to the problem, you're going to be a lot more valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a real nugget. I think I had a really hard time conceptualizing that. And I think that my job search really turned a lot when I realized that I was trying, it wasn't just that there was a role open to write SQL, is that there was a role open to solve a business problem. And then I think I started moving forward more in my interviews once I realized that and started trying to adjust to it. And I'm still every day learning how to do that, but
Yeah.
definitely a big one. This person asked, what does your typical day look like as a data analyst? And I would like to add on to that. Has that looked really different as you've gone to each role?
I love and hate this question at the same time. Um, it's just because every day is different, right? Like
Hmm.
Monday is different than what Tuesday was, which is different from what today was. In my current role, I deal a lot with commissions data, so sales compensation. So the beginning of the month is really, really busy, like with people saying, hey, I got paid this much, but I expected this much. So it's like I have to go figure out why there's that difference, and whether it's
Hmm.
in the Tableau calculation, the input fields we have, got to figure out where that is. During the middle of the month, it's a little slower on those type of ad hoc requests. So it's more, writing SQL queries to build a new dashboard or to run an analysis or an experiment. And then end of month is prepping for that pay, saying like, hey, is this quota accurate? Is this report still running correctly? And then it's always going back and forth between, in my current role, probably 5 or 6 different teams, because there's connections between us and finance and strategy and revenue operations. So it's just like a ton of communication where everyone has to get aligned to get the right decision or number or compensation. And I'd say that's pretty similar across all the roles, whether it's as a junior analyst, senior analyst, or different companies. I'd say the one major thing about being a senior analyst is you're just left to your own devices a little more, right? Like you have a
Yeah.
project and you're given it and you just got to go figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
As a junior analyst, there's a little more attention given when you didn't know how to do something or who to ask or things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, my days, I mean, I kind of have like a wide net that I can cast over like describing what my every day is going to look different, but it's kind of like a subset of I have meetings with my clients. So like I have meetings that I'm doing presentations, I'm getting feedback, I'm gathering requirements, and then also just like the development. And so I really like days that I have like one, maybe two meetings. And it's like they're not super long meetings, and then the rest of the day is development. I really like those days. But this week, I have not had any of those days, and it's been all very meeting heavy days. I recently got access to Gong. So this is just a very kind of edge case tip for anybody who's listening. Recording meetings has been like such a game changer for me. And I got access to Gong, which is like this service that'll like kind of give you summaries and stuff. It's like a enhancement to the recordings. It's really helpful because I really cover a lot of ground in my meetings with clients. They have to describe to me what all of the different fields in their data mean and all the things that they want and all the business problems they want to solve. And then we're doing all of this planning. So I just record it now. And then I don't have to store any of it in my brain. And I can just come back to it later. It's been
Yeah,
amazing.
that's the only way I could do what you're doing is I'm not very good
Yeah.
at remembering things. So it either has to be written down
Mhm.
explicitly or yeah, I have to have a recording. So if it's not written down, it's in my brain out the other ear really quick.
The thing that I do now is I actually say action items. Almost awkwardly, I'll insert that into the conversation and I tell people ahead of time that's what I'm doing because then I can search the transcript for action items. So every time we talk about something that I need to do, I'll be like, okay, that's an action item. And then I can just
Nice.
like quick come back to it. That's
Oh, that's super
my new thing. But yeah, that's kind of, I mean, I work remotely and have all your roles been remote?
smart. After COVID, they were remote. So yeah, which
I
is
think it's
what.
probably a little bit of a different vibe if you're in person than if you're remote.
Yeah, it was interesting. My very first job, like I said, it was a startup, and
Hmm.
I find myself looking back on it now, feeling like I was the luckiest little kid in the world having this experience as like I was one of two analysts in the entire company. So I was doing like all the data for the entire company, for the finance team, for the product
Hmm.
team, and I was presenting it to like the CEO, the VP of finance, like all these people that were like making
Wow.
major decisions, but
Yeah.
I didn't feel any of the pressure because I didn't know any different.
Oh, yep.
But
Sorry. I
if I
just
had
knocked
gone
something
back,
over.
like I was in that role now, I would feel so much pressure presenting those insights to like a CEO now. I'd be like, oh my gosh, this is
Yeah.
crazy. So I find
Yeah.
it
I
very
mean,
lucky.
it definitely is nerve-wracking. Sorry, I just knocked
Good.
something over. It was just the light that I have right here. I have to put it at an angle so it can like get the right angle. Um, do you have any tips for people for like talking to CEOs and stuff for managing the nerves? Because that is, I mean, like you said, you weren't nervous, but that is a pretty nerve-wracking thing.
Yeah, I don't know anymore. Like I feel like I've regressed in that aspect. Like I was really good at the beginning because I didn't know a difference, but now if I were to do it again, I'd feel a lot more nervous. But I think the biggest thing is just being prepared, trying to anticipate any questions they might ask, especially when you're presenting data. So either have notes or really understand where the data came from. Um, like you'll present a high level number, but sometimes they want to dig deeper. So
Hmm.
be prepared with those deeper dives would be the biggest thing.
Have you, in your interviews, have you had interviews with like executives? That seems to be a more of a startup thing where you get to talk to like CEOs and stuff.
Yeah, I haven't really done that. Most of the companies So the three other companies that I've worked to have all been publicly traded. So the first
Mhm.
company I was at was I was internally hired. So I think I interviewed at with like the VP of product, and that was it. And they basically were like, "Hey, you want the job?" I was like, "Yeah." They're like, "All right, cool, you're good," because I'd been doing the work already. So, but yeah, since then it was all publicly traded. So it was kind of like VPs of certain departments, but never like a executive level type interview. Which fortunate because I would be a wreck if I were interviewing with them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've had a couple people ask me, they're like, hey, I've got an interview coming up with like the vice president or something. Do you have any tips? And it's hard to give tips on that because everyone has such a different vibe. I personally, my very first screening call with the company that I work for now was with the vice president because he had seen my post on LinkedIn. And he liked seeing, and also something you mentioned earlier, like in the comments, like how you can show your critical thinking in the comments. He had gone through my posts and he had seen all the comments, like the way that I was responding to commenters and stuff. And he was like, that is really impressive and lets me know that you're going to be good at talking to customers because I can see how you answer questions and think through them in the comments. Um, so I kind of didn't have any time to like, it wasn't like I kind of had gotten invested in the role and then, oh, I'm going to talk to the vice president. It was like straight in. But then I had another one where it was my last interview. It was with the I think either the CEO or the vice president. I was so nervous. I remember I was just like sweating so much. And this was before I realized that my goal was to present myself as someone who can solve his business problems. So I really just flew in there and looking back, I didn't get that job. I was very naive. The guy was really nice. He gave me a lot of really great advice. He's like, I think you're gonna be a great analyst someday. We just need somebody who's more experienced. But I was so nervous for that. But I don't really have good tips for that because it's hard to, every
Yeah, I,
exec is gonna
I
be so
think the best
different.
tip is do as much research as you can, right? Because the
Mm,
more knowledge you have going into an interview about who the person is, what the department is doing, what they're struggling with, what the role is about, like the more you can talk to specifics. Because VPs, like usually, from what I found, if you're interviewing with someone down the road, like a VP or president, it's likely you're in the third or fourth interview and they're really
mm,
just looking to confirm that the hiring manager is choosing the right person. So
mm,
basically you just want to come in and say like, "Hey, I'm a good culture fit, I've already got my technical skills passed, I've got my soft skills passed. Now I just need to prove to you that I understand the business and I'll add value here." So if you can understand the business, ask them questions because they're going to have more knowledge than a hiring manager of like what's to come in the next 6 months, right? So ask them
mm,
forward looking things like, hey, in this role, how will I know that I'll be successful a year from now, right? Like, what will I have done in a year to have made this role successful in your eyes? Because that's the question they're going to get asked, right? Like, hey, is that new hire working out? How are they doing?
mm. Yeah, that's really good. I'm just taking a second to process through that. I feel like I gotta like write that down. That's a really good piece of advice. I saw this one up here. I didn't want to lose it in the chat. This one was for you specifically. What are the posters
Oh,
hanging
yeah.
on the wall
So,
behind you?
so these are all my they're Lord of the Rings kind of locations. So they've got
Mm,
Rivendell, Rohan, Fanghorn Forest, Khazad-dûm, and then we got a couple other
wow.
ones. You see those ones? Yeah, over there. It was one of my Christmas
Wow.
presents a couple years ago for my wife. We're both very nerdy and love Lord of the Rings. So
You're gonna have to go to New Zealand and actually match the pictures on your wall to the places that they were filmed in.
yes, I would love to one day.
Probably all the South Island. Um,
Yeah.
the there was a question that I just had about interviews and stuff. Oh yeah. So your interviews, did you find like did you have to say like okay, what I'm noticing is that a lot of more senior level positions will list Python in there. And I actually think I saw a question here. Someone had said something about how like there's a lot of different, oh yeah, here it is. There's a lot of different, sometimes you'll see job postings, even for entry level analysts that have like a ton of things on them. Um, and I'm noticing that it seems like oftentimes those are all just like either A, you may or may not use this in this role, or they seem like they almost just like copy and pasted like what they think a data analyst job posting is. And then when you get more into it, you're like, oh, I would just be using Excel. Like that's literally what the job is. So how do you kind of like, as you're looking for roles, how do you kind of figure out, okay, am I going to be a good fit for this? Do I have the skills for this? And like, how do I need to prepare to make sure that I can succeed in this interview?
Yeah, that's a good question. So
Big question,
before you ever
sorry.
get, no, you're good. Before you ever get an interview, um, there's a few different things you could do. So obviously you can like read the job description thoroughly, see what comes up more than once. Because if they talk about it more than once, it's probably important. If it's just mentioned, right? Like AWS, they may or may not use it, like you said. But if they mention it more than once, like SQL or Excel or Tableau, then likely that's what they use. So you'll want to have experience with that or be able to talk to how you've been working on it. And then the second way before an interview is if you can figure out who works at that company and even better at like the specific department, reach out on LinkedIn and ask them. Be like, hey,
Mm,
I'm looking into getting into data analytics. I was curious what tech stack your company uses, and do you think that's like common for other roles, right? Something super easy to like say like, oh yeah, we use Snowflake and Power BI. That's
hmm
kind of a super easy intro to people that they don't have to give you any free advice. They don't have to work hard to look at your resume or anything like that. It's like a simple question. And then it opens the door for a referral as well if you can keep up that communication. So I always find it hard when people are like really desperate to get a job in the next month, right? Like it's almost too late for you. Like I'm sorry to say it, but like you should have started this process a while ago and building these relationships. So
hmm
that's the advice I can give is just start as early as you can. Start reaching out to people that are just ahead of you in the process of where you want to be and start asking them these questions, right? Like you're a great example. You're doing this with senior analysts and getting a bunch of feedback. So do things like that and be proactive about it. Like I said, take control of your career and that'll be the best thing for you.
Yeah. So that reaching out that you said, were you doing that when you went for your other roles? Did you like reach out and like ask them, what's your stack and stuff?
I did a little bit. Most of the roles I've gotten, I've already had a connection at the company. So I've been able to message them and either rekindle a relationship or keep up that relationship and basically have like an inside person and be able to ask them those questions. Like I said, my second job, my former manager basically recruited me to that company. So I had an
Mm-hmm.
in and I was asking him all those questions. I was like, hey, I don't know Tableau. I've never used it. Do they care? And he was
Mm-hmm.
like, well, Domo, so it'd be pretty easy to learn Tableau. Just talk about how you learned Domo. And I was like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
sweet. Right. So like it's I recommend these things that I haven't necessarily done a ton, but I know
Yeah.
that if you have that relationship, it's so valuable, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I didn't have that relationship, that's what I would try to do to get it. Is
Yeah.
start reaching out proactively. And I've done it a little
Yeah.
bit. Yeah, it's hard. It takes effort, but it's definitely worth it if you're looking 6 to 12 months down the road.
Yeah. I definitely think that's a much more valuable use of like your messages, especially like your in-mails and stuff than like I think that content creators get a lot of messages from people who are like, "Hey, I want to get into analytics. Can you guide me?" I'm sure you've gotten that exact message a bunch of times. And no, we generally can't. I mean, people who are offering career services, like and whatever things that we've got, we can offer that, but we can't offer personalized advice to 10 people a day or however many messages we get a day. So it's a much more valuable use of your time to find someone who's doing something that you would really like to do that's really not that far ahead of you and who doesn't have a bunch of followers and ask them um, all these questions that you just said. What I know I saw you have like your what services, what things do you have like for your profile for people? Because I know that you've got some.
Yeah, so I started out offering resume services, just reviewing resumes because again, I feel like I'm really good at creating good bullet points, creating value in resumes. My resumes have always had like a higher than normal success rate on just cold applying. I don't recommend cold applying, but when I have, I've had success. So I started offering that, and then I just released a job search kit that's basically just 7 different resources of like, best practices for resume and how to implement them. Some of these like messaging templates, so you don't have to figure out what to say every time. A bunch of common data interview questions. So things like that that'll kind of be all in one place, so you don't have to search, 500 LinkedIn posts or search Google and see which one is actually accurate and figure out what's the best way to job search. So those are the 2 things that I have now, and I'm working on either a resume like course. So basically you can just take a video course and I'll walk you through like how to do a resume. And then I want to say I'm going to release this soon, but it's a roadmap, a guide for people of like what they should do in 3 to 6 months to land a job. But that one's proving to be a lot more time consuming than I thought. And time is not what I have the most of right now.
Yeah. Yeah, time is, when I look at like my job and everything, like I've now learned that like my time is like the most valuable resource that I have. But that the stuff that you've got out, like that's definitely, when I got into data analytics, I did it by accident. I was never planning on switching careers, and then I just kind of decided maybe I'll give this a try. And then I started job searching, and it was terrible, and it was so hard. And I realized very, very quickly that one really crucial detail that I had missed is that learning data analytics would not be the hard part. That would be the fun part. But actually figuring out how to job search, how to write your resume, how to optimize your LinkedIn, how to talk to recruiters, what are the different steps? Like there's just on the data job search, that's just like such this huge thing. Whereas like for me, I was a nanny before this. Like I just like had moms recommend me to other moms, and then I would meet with a mom and their kids, and they would love me, and I would start. Um, but trying to get into data analytics for the first time, I had zero connections. I knew zero people in the data world. So I had to figure out every single thing. And that took me months. Like it was just months of figuring that stuff out.
Yeah.
And it sucked like a lot.
Yeah.
So I can see the value in what you've got out there.
Yeah. And honestly, like I enjoy job searching. Like I know some people
Really?
like you said it sucks, but like I think it's kind of fun, right? Like
Hmm.
it's a way for me to be an analyst again because I get to try and dissect a company's need based on a job description. When I'm interviewing, I get to dissect like what their issues are and why they're hiring for the role, right? Like it's kind of fun in that aspect. And I keep up my skills when I do that too. I find if I'm not talking to recruiters or talking with hiring managers, like I lose a lot of that skill set over time. So like I'm not ever looking to leave my current job, but I'm always open to take, new hire like new interviews just to see like can I still get a job if I need it? And it keeps up those skills because it really is something that can be developed, but it does take work.
Hmm. Do you think that it would make people at your company uncomfortable to hear that you had that like openness? That's something I've always like wondered about.
I don't know. I've always just found like if you're providing enough value, they're not going to care because if you're providing value, they're going to do whatever they can to keep you, right? If you're kind of a mediocre analyst and you're not providing a ton of value, then yeah, that might not be the best thing to be open about because they might say like, oh, if you want to leave, then leave. We don't need you, right? Like we were looking for an excuse to kind of let some people
Yeah.
go. So here's one right now, right?
Hmm.
Um, but again, I think it's a little bit of a confidence thing for me. I'm confident that if that company did let me go because I said I was taking recruiter interviews to see like how I could do in them, like I wouldn't want to be at that company anymore, right? Because They don't have my best interest at heart. They have their best interest at heart. So I'd rather work somewhere that like they don't really care if you're taking interviews because they're confident that they're paying you enough. They have a good culture. They have good benefits, all these things that will like retain employees, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen some people will get into their first data job. Had this conversation a lot with people who get into their first data jobs and then they've been at it for a couple months and then they realize like the culture is really toxic or I'm really not learning anything. And they're like, so what do I do? Like, do I wait for a certain amount of time? Do I have to keep it really secret? You know, like, do I have to do any of my resume stuff very quietly? And I'm like, listen, I wouldn't go like put yourself open to work on your LinkedIn, but
Right.
like that would be a little aggressive. Um, but I think that always like I don't think there's anything wrong with looking towards next steps, but I certainly wouldn't want to like I guess I wouldn't want to have like I wouldn't want to like have the head of operations of my company like come across me saying that I'm like looking for other roles, you know? So
Yeah.
I worry about that stuff. But I'm also like I worry about things like that. Like I'm terrible at like negotiating. Is that something that you seem like the type of person who also like has gotten a handle on how to negotiate for like salary and benefits and stuff? Is that right?
So this is like one way that I negotiate is I take these
Hmm.
recruiter like outreaches basically like because I'm not actively applying to anything, right? People are reaching out to me usually, and I'll ask them up front, like the very first thing is what's the salary range? Like what is this position
Hmm.
worth? That way I always know. So that's basically my negotiation is asking that first question. And then I get a gauge on the market and I can either come back to my current company and be like, hey, like this is where the market is. Like, how do we get me to this range? And then we come up with a plan. Or if I am actively interviewing, then I have all this data that I can show them and say, hey, I'm currently being considered for this amount. And it's real because people are have those job openings, right? It's not just Glassdoor that is a range from 50 to 150, right? Like it's very narrow.
Yeah.
Because I'm not great at like the in-person negotiation and be like, oh well, you don't have this benefit, so I want $10,000 more, right? Like I prefer to do
Yeah.
the negotiation before you even like know if you're getting the offer or not.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, do you have any other tips that you can impart on us? It's 7:57 my time. So do you have any other tips, things you'd like to give to us before we go?
Uh, I don't know. There's a lot out there in the data world, a lot to know, a lot to learn. So I guess the biggest tip is make a plan. Just figure out what's important to you first of all. Like, why are you getting into data analytics? What do you want in a job? Right? Like for me, it was I don't want to do statistical heavy work. I want to be close to the business and drive decisions. And then once you have that, take that and run with it. Say like, okay, what companies, what departments do that? Who are those people that do that? Reach out to them, start that journey, um, and do it as soon as you can. Because if you wait until your tech skills are up to par, right? Like you're not going to have the benefit of having that relationship yet. So biggest tip is yeah, that just start a plan with where you want to be, what you want to do, and then go after it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the other things you've said kind of nest very nicely into that as well.
Yeah. Well, this was fun. Thanks for doing this, Annie. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks everybody else who tuned in. Um, yeah, I guess I'll see everyone on the next coffee chat. But thanks for coming to this, and I hope that people enjoyed getting to talk to you live for the first time.
I hope so too. I'll have to read some of the comments later.
Yeah. Here, I'm gonna end the broadcast.